Welcome back. Last episode, we landed our kitchen pod, tried our best to fix the plaster, got some concrete ready to accept an under deck. Oh, watch your step. Water tank, and bolted this thing down to the ground. And by ground, I mean concrete footings. If you're new here, I'm Rob Dingledye, and this is my show where I teach you how to do more things yourself. And I highly recommend you go back and watch the first episode of this saga. And if you're a returning viewer, it's good to see you again, and welcome to another episode of Dingle DIY. Now, coming up in this episode, we're going to start building the deck. Now, there are a few unusual aspects to this deck, like the water tank being underneath it, proximity to the ground, and it has a bit of a funny angle just so we don't crash into the fence. Now, timber isn't perfect, and you've got to deal with these imperfections, especially with decking boards. So stick around, I'll give you a few tips on how to deal with that and show you a few techniques so that you can save time and effort without compromising on an amazing result. Now let's head back to the start and I'll show you how I set this thing out. All right, I'm just jumping on the GoPro because it's been raining and this camera's waterproof, so if we get rained on, we'll be right. Now, I just want to mention that today we're setting out. We're doing stumps because we're going to start building the deck in this kitchen, even though we haven't finished other things. I want to get this deck happening and we can finish off the other stuff later. Now, I've mentioned this long, skinny driveway previously. Now, it's not just a driveway. There was actually once upon a time a very skinny paddock that ran along the side of the driveway as well, and we pulled that paddock out. So that basically meant we dismantled the fence and took the fence posts out and took all that barbed wire down and stuff like that. So that fence just looked like shit, and that's why we got rid of it, because it was not really that practical. And it was just really ugly as you came up towards the house. So we saved all those fence posts. I'm gonna reuse them in the ground here as stumps. They're gonna be plenty good enough for stumps for this deck. And the price of timber right now is pretty crazy. So here comes the rain. I'll put some hurdles up, some marks on the ground. I'm gonna go hire an auger or a post hole digger or whatever. Get these holes dug, get the stumps in, and then we'll come back and frame it all up and put some decking boards down. Before we get started, I do want to mention span tables and what that means. Span tables basically tell you how far your timber can span, depending on what timber it is and what purpose that timber is fulfilling. Here's an example of a span table specifically for MGP 10 and decking, where the 90x45 pine is being used as bearers and joists. So what I'm doing here is setting up what I like to call hurdles. I'm just utilizing the existing fence so I don't have to put any extra pegs in the ground. Now with these hurdles, it gives me something I can put some marks on. I can put some nails on those marks and hook a bit of string over that. I can then use that string and a few measurements combined with some paint on the ground to guide me on where I need to drill my holes. Now that the holes are marked out, we can head up to the top paddock where we keep all the leftover timber and building materials. Just chucking a few lengths of these fence posts on the roof racks. I can cut them in half later. I also went down to the hire shop and hired an auger. This version's a 2-person auger, petrol powered. You can get hydraulic powered versions of these. There are lots of different types out there. So this was the most affordable one and did the job beautifully. I did get the owner, Melissa, to give me a hand. I probably couldn't have gotten it done without her, and this was a bit of an arm workout, so thanks, Melissa. With the holes drilled, it's time to concrete these stumps in. Now what I'm using is a rapid set no mix concrete, which is pretty self-explanatory. Sets quickly, you can throw it in the hole, throw a bucket of water on top without mixing it, and this concrete is going to cure like any other ordinary rapid set concrete mix. Just want to give a quick shout out to Base Camp as well. They sent me this dust mask for free and it's absolutely doing the job, and there'll be more about them later on in the video. Now, because I took the time to set up some hurdles and drill my holes in a nice straight line, that means my stumps are going to be in a nice straight line. So for now, I'm just getting the concrete in the holes, getting these posts and stumps standing up on their own. I will come back later with a spirit level and plumb these up and sight them to make sure they're all straight. And I know some of the tops of these posts are looking a bit rough, but don't worry, we'll cut them down to height later and they'll be a nice, neat finish. This square post here is going to act as a support for a shade sail later, and there is another one. We'll come back to that in just a second, because first I wanted to put this whaling plate on.
this whaling plate we can bolt to the structure. So to start off with, I just put a clamp at one end to hold one end of it roughly in position while I put the other end exactly in position. Now I'm just nailing it on to begin with because you can bend nails just to hammer this thing around to get it perfectly level. Once I'm happy with it, I can come back later and bolt it to make sure it's not going to go anywhere. There are two reasons why I decided to start with this whaling plate. One is so that I can get it to the right height and make sure the decking boards will be flush with the floor inside this little shed. The other reason is it gives me something easy to hook my tape measure onto, and that's going to help me get these posts in the right position and make sure they're nice and parallel with the building as well. The next step for me is to cut all my stumps to the right height, and there is two ways to figure out what height to cut your stumps at. One is with a laser, the other is with spirit levels and straight edges, but the concept is still the same. You want to start with the finished floor height, deduct the dimension of your decking, your joist and your bearer, and that's going to give you a mark on where to cut your stump. Now with the concrete cured on the posts, I can remove these braces and repurpose them as bearers. Whee! And the bearers are what sit on top of the stumps and support our joists above. So commonly here, we use 90 by 90 or laminated 90 by 45 treated pine. And laminating is basically putting a shitload of nails through the timber to turn two pieces of wood into one piece of wood. You want to nail this from both sides with gal nails and repeat this process until all your bearers are in. Now one tip is to keep checking all your heights and measurements as you go, because basically if your stumps are at the right height, everything else should end up at the right height as well. So here's a bit more detail on how to cut the stump, especially if they're square. The round ones are a bit of a different story, but basically I mark my height, square off the lines, cut it with a circular saw, and don't forget to wear your PPE. Obviously you don't want any splinters getting in your eyebrows. And finish off your cut with a recipro saw or a hand saw. With that done, it's pretty straightforward to measure up your bearer, put it in position. This is where things stood at the end of that day. Now there are some elements here that are starting to look a little bit unusual that I mentioned at the start of the video. So the proximity to the ground, the angle that goes along the fence line here, and the relationship between the framing and the underdeck water tank. I will go into a lot more detail with how to deal with these issues and issues like this, and will explain my thinking and what I'm doing here, but it's going to be a lot easier to explain that with a few more joists and timbers in position. So for now, let's just head down, get those on, and I'll come back and explain all those elements to you a bit later on. For now though, if you have been enjoying the video so far, it would be an amazing help if you could click the subscribe button if you haven't already. It's one of the main ways to support the channel. I am trying to get to 100,000 subscribers, so every subscription counts. The bigger following I get, the closer I get to achieving my dream of being a full-time YouTuber. It doesn't cost you anything, so like I said, if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe and you won't miss out on any future videos. Moving forward with the framing, I am trying to get the perimeter done so I can get the rest of my joists on. And one thing I do like to do with my decks, put batten screws everywhere, especially in the bearers and on the perimeter. Nails are great for laminating and holding things in position while you get everything where you want it. And batten screws lock everything in to stop any warping occurring over time. The reason I was focusing on the perimeter is it gives me something to mark and put nails into, and those nails help me hold my chalk line at one end while I snap it at the other. This chalk line is going to mark the position of my joists on the bearers, and it's going to ensure my joists will be nice and straight, which means when it comes time to screw our decking boards on, our screw lines will be nice and straight as well. For now, I'm just nailing all these joists on. I will come back and screw these off just like I did with the bearers. There are a few angle cuts that need to be made to butt the joists into the angled bearer. And even though the bearer is the same height as a joist, it's still technically a bearer because that is supporting the weight of the joists. Now, before I explain the framing, I've just got a little bit of digging to do here. And depending on where you live, you need a certain clearance from the soil to your timber, but you certainly don't want them touching the ground at all. All right, it's the end of the day here.
One, because I've run out of timber, and two, because it's a long weekend. So last day of the week. Now it's looking pretty close. There are a few bits of wood in this little area that are missing. Like I said, I ran out of timber, but I want to show you how this deck has gone together and how it's a little bit different to what normally happens. So what normally happens is a situation like this, where you've got your stump supporting a bearer and then your joists sit on top of the bearer. Now that's pretty normal. It's also pretty normal to have a whaling plate against your building. This is a steel frame building, so I'm gonna have to bolt through that. And if it was a timber frame building, I would be batten screwing. And if it was masonry, I'd be using dynabolts. Now that's why I don't have a row of stumps and a bearer against there. I can just use the structure to hold the deck up there. When we go towards this water tank, you'll notice that the bearers, some of the bearers, are actually at the same height as the joist. Now that's okay to do. So the bearer is a 90 by 90 or laminated 45 by 90, two of them. So we've got bearers underneath and we've got this kind of bearer on top, and now that's supporting these joists because I want all my joists running in the same direction. But there wasn't enough room above the water tank here to get my bearer underneath and get my joists over the top. So when you have a situation like that, you just have to fix your joists in a different way. So nails are pretty good, but they're not quite good enough in that situation. So because there's no timber underneath the joists supporting them, all the support is coming from the fixings. So framing nails, you could probably get away with it if you used enough of them, but in Australia at least, you need either 2 batten screws or a joist hanger or 2 triple grips. So the joist hangers are those little boots that go on and then you just nail them everywhere. They're pretty good. I just use batten screws because I had them. I also can't connect my compressor because there's no electricity out here, which means I'd have to hand nail the boots, which I don't want to do for this many joists. So that's the structural side of things. So I've kind of used that thought process in other areas as well, like on this 45-degree section. That's also a bearer, just because some of these joists didn't quite make it to the other bearer because it's on an angle. Anytime a joist is hitting a bearer at the same height, I've put 2 screws at each end of that joist. So another situation is here. Now I've done things differently here because the soil was too high and I didn't want to do too much digging and we didn't want to pay for any earth moving. So that's another reason why the bearers and the joists are the same height. It gets my bearers further away from the ground, which means I don't have to do as much digging. So another handy tip in situations where you're dealing with angles, squares are a bit more predictable and easy to measure, easy to set out. Sometimes you just make a few things up as you go, especially with this angle. So one thing I did is I left my bearers long. So an example of that is just here. I didn't know where things were going to finish up, so I just left my bearer long. And this one underneath was long, and then I made these ones long. And that way you've got something to mark on. You're not holding things in midair. You've got, you know, more room to work. And then when it comes time at the end, you could use a handsaw, but I love using this Recipro, and it's got a massive blade on it, which means you can cut through anything pretty much, which is the best bit, and it helps you get those nice, neat, flush cuts. Once you've nailed everything in position, you can kind of just scribe along your timber with the blade and just cut off your bearers or any excess in your joists perfectly on the spot. What else was I going to add to that? Oh yeah, so the other thing I was going to add is it was really helpful for cutting the stumps because we used those second-hand fence posts and they were round. It's possible to use a circular saw, but it's just not as effective as a blade that goes all the way through the timber, and that really helped me cut my stumps level because I didn't have any flat faces on the stumps. So yeah, handy little tip for you. Well worth getting one of those blades if you already have a Recipro. Otherwise, hand saws work, chainsaws work if you're that adventurous, but yeah, that's one way I can work a bit more efficiently, is instead of spending all this time measuring things, especially when I'm working on my own, leave my timber long, just nail it in position and cut the excess off later.
There you have it. I hope you found that information useful. Now I did come back after the long weekend with some more timber to finish off the deck frame. I also included a few fiddly jobs like getting the bolts in position to make sure the whaling plate won't go anywhere, and some things I didn't film, we're just putting on the plinth boards to stop any soil pushing up against the deck frame. With the framing done, it's time to celebrate with some B-roll. But don't go anywhere, we've still got the decking boards to put on, and I've still got heaps of tips to give you in relation to installing your decking boards, like how to get started, how to get your board straight, and how to keep your screw line straight.
Now I just want to let you know, we're going to be doing a sleeper path with a bit of rock in between from the deck towards this area, just how we did it up at the house with those red gum railway sleepers. So if you haven't seen that video, feel free to check that out. And the whole point of that path is going to connect a portable cool room. There's a lot of dirt around here. Point is, it's all stockpiled at the moment. We need to level it out, do a bit of earthwork, create a more of a stable and flat foundation for the cool room. And once this dirt is gone, we'll put some crushed rock down as well and turn it into just a little bit of a car park. There will be some earth moving happening today, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm going to be focusing on putting some decking boards down, and then we'll come back to all this a bit later on.
To start off with the decking, I actually need to put some more blocking in to support my border and the pieces of decking that butt into the border. Now, I do like to put a border on because it hides the end grain of the decking. It's just a neater finish and an easy way to start installing your decking boards.
All right, real quick before the earth mover gets here, and this is why we put that extra block of timber down all the way along, so that when these come crashing in, you can screw them to this joist here. I spaced it out so the screws weren't too close to the edge, because that's where the decking boards would split. Anyway, here comes Izzy.
With that little earth moving montage out of the way, it's time to actually teach you how to put these decking boards on. I just want to reiterate, I have started with the border, but only 2 pieces of the border. This just gets me started. I usually like to leave my decking boards long, let them overhang the frame, cut them on the spot, and finish off the border later. I will touch on that more, but right now we just want to focus on spreading out the boards. The whole purpose of this is to make sure we're minimizing waste while also staggering our joins. The next thing to make sure of is that the ends of the boards are all square. And I like to make my cuts with a circular saw and a speed square, as opposed to picking up each individual board, taking it over to a drop saw and making a cut there. It's much more efficient to do it this way. And with the ends of our boards square, we can butt them into the border with an appropriate spacing. I like to use around a 3mm to 5mm spacing off the border, just to allow for any expansion. And with all that considered, we can mark the decking board halfway on the joist and cut off the excess. At this stage of the process, it's all about getting the boards laid out. I haven't actually screwed anything down yet. And the whole purpose of this is to give myself a platform to work on, make sure I've got enough material, and most importantly, to make sure all the cuts are square and joining halfway on a joist. Once all the boards are laid out, it's time to get the drills ready. Use a chalk line to mark every 5th board in a straight line. And then I screw this board down to that chalk line. Decking boards are notorious for bending, so you can't just assume they're straight. You need to use a chalk line to mark out a straight line, and use that as a guideline to keep everything nice and tidy.
All right, I want to explain this setup where we're getting ready to screw off the boards. So what's important to me is getting this 5mm gap correct at the end. I've got some screws going through the packers so they don't fall into the abyss. And I've got these packers and they're straddling over this piece of string, and that piece of string is going to tell me where to put my screws, because it's picking up the point here where I've already put a screw and a point at the other end where I've already put a screw. So that'll keep our screws in a nice neat line. I'm also using these packers to space the boards left and right. If all my measurements are correct, when I measured out every 5th board, it means all the gaps in between should be 5mm, and these are 5mm packers. So that's the current setup. I would prefer to use chalk, and I will be using chalk lines later on, but I need to set 2 gaps currently, so the end gap and the gaps on the sides. So it's making it a bit difficult to do that with chalk. And also, none of these boards are really fixed in position at all, and the more screws you get into each board, the easier it becomes to screw them off, because you know they're not going to move. Starting off is always the fiddly bit, and then we will come back and finish off strong. All right, we've almost finished the deck, but the last thing I want to do is throw this shade sail up. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor. Now, Basecamp make this awesome little mask. They reached out to me and wanted to know what I thought about it, so they sent me one. And you may have seen me using it in a few clips here and there, or at this other job I'm in Rye. So I just want to take some time to talk about this, why I like it, and what you get in the package. So straight out of the box, this is your mask, and there are replaceable filters. So those are your filters. The beauty of this is it's actually got vents in it. It's not just one of those crappy paper masks where all the air just comes around the side and none of it gets filtered. I'm sure you have dealt with those before. A bit like something like this. This is what I had during COVID and that nightmare. And the one thing I hate about these is when you wear them, it feels like they're trying to rip your ears off, and they don't do a very good job of filtering on a construction site. They might be good to stop a sneeze, but for my line of work, that's not up to the task. So what I really like about this is it actually filters the air. You've got these replaceable inserts on the inside, they're comfortable, and the beauty of these is they've got cutouts for your ears and Velcro on the back. So when you're putting it on, it's adjustable so you can get it nice and snug, and the fact that it's wrapping around your head means it's not trying to rip your ears off. So this thing is awesome. It will definitely be a big part of my arsenal. I'm showing you this just because of how clunky it is, how annoying it is. You're in a crawl space, under a house, in a ceiling cavity, something like that. I can't tell you how many times I've knocked one of these little cartridges off just because I'm working in a tight spot. So it's frustrating. If you knock this off, it's not doing its job. So Basecamp, thank you. I will be keeping this, I will be using it. I really appreciate you sending me one. Basecamp have decided to look after you guys as well, so they have given me an affiliate link, they have given me a discount code, so check those out in the description. It doesn't cost you any more money to use the affiliate link. I just get a small commission of that, and that is one way you can support the channel, by supporting the products that support me. So shout out to Basecamp for this one. The discount code is displayed on the screen and the affiliate link is in the description. So we'll throw this shade sail up and call it a day. All right, that's it for the deck and the shade sail. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. I did build this deck in an unusual way, but we were trying to salvage materials. We had that water tank to deal with, and we also had the low ground clearance to deal with, and we didn't have any machines here to dig that ground out of the way. So I just built the deck a little bit differently, but it's come up a treat. Shade sail works a treat. Now we can get on to getting this blueberry grater assembled into this room, get the cool room organized, get some power organized, and the whole purpose of this deck and this portable kitchen / storage area, it will come to life very shortly. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, feel free to subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next video. We'll see you then.